The right to be free from slavery is one of the most basic promises of human dignity. It's a promise we make to one another, a declaration that no person can be owned, bought, or sold. This fundamental principle is captured in Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states simply and powerfully, "No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms." This isn't just a lofty ideal written on paper. It is the essential foundation of a just society. It means every individual has the right to control their own body, their own labor, and their own future. Without this freedom, all other rights lose their meaning. It is the bedrock upon which personal liberty is built. When we think of slavery, our minds often drift to the history books. We picture the transatlantic slave trade, vast plantations, and the brutal systems that powered empires for centuries. We rightly remember the abolitionist movements that fought to dismantle these horrific institutions. These historical struggles were monumental, fought by brave individuals who believed in a world where freedom was universal. They challenged the economic and social orders of their time, arguing that no person's humanity could be denied. The official abolition of these forms of chattel slavery marked a major victory for human rights, a turning point that seemed to close a dark chapter in our shared history. But the story did not end there. The chains of the past were not entirely broken. They were merely reshaped and hidden from plain sight. Today, slavery persists in new, insidious forms, a phenomenon we now call modern slavery. It is a quiet epidemic that thrives in the shadows of our global economy. Unlike historical slavery, it is not always defined by legal ownership. Instead, it is defined by control and exploitation, where one person's will is completely dominated by another's through violence, coercion, or deception. This modern version of an ancient evil is a betrayal of the progress we thought we had secured, a stark reminder that the fight for freedom is far from over. Understanding this modern fight begins with recognizing that slavery is not a relic of the past. It is a present-day crisis that affects millions of people across the globe. These are not distant figures from another time. They are children, women, and men living among us. They may be working in factories that make our clothes, harvesting the food we eat, or cleaning the buildings where we work. Their bondage is maintained not by laws but by threats, debt, and manipulation. Acknowledging this reality is the first step toward confronting it. We must look beyond the history books and see the faces of those who are still waiting for their freedom today, right now. Modern slavery is a complex web of exploitation with many different forms, each one designed to trap and control a human being for profit or personal gain. One of the most widespread types is forced labor. This occurs when individuals are compelled to work against their will under the menace of a penalty. This penalty could be violence against them or their families, the confiscation of their identity documents, or the accumulation of an impossible-to-repay debt. Victims are often lured by false promises of a good job and a better life, only to find themselves in a situation they cannot escape. They are treated as disposable tools, not as human beings with rights and dreams. Another common form of bondage is debt bondage or peonage. This is perhaps the most subtle and widespread method of enslavement. It begins when a person takes a loan or advance for a small sum of money, often to cover an emergency like a medical bill or a poor harvest. The terms of the loan are then manipulated, with exorbitant interest rates and hidden fees, ensuring the debt can never be repaid. The person's labor becomes the only means of repayment, and they are forced to work for little or no pay for an indefinite period. This cycle of debt can even be passed down through generations, trapping entire families in servitude. Forced marriage is another devastating form of modern slavery, one that disproportionately affects women and girls. In this context, a marriage is not a union based on love and consent, but a transaction where an individual is forced to marry without their agreement. They are often treated as property, subjected to sexual exploitation, forced labor within the home, and complete control by their spouse and their spouse's family. They lose their autonomy, their access to education, and their ability to choose their own path in life. This practice robs them of their childhood and their future, reducing their existence to one of servitude. Finally, human trafficking is the engine that fuels many forms of modern slavery. It is the process of recruiting, transporting, and harboring people for the purpose of exploitation. Traffickers use violence, threats, and deception to prey on the vulnerable, targeting those facing poverty, discrimination, or political instability. Victims are moved across neighborhoods, cities, and international borders, isolated from their communities and support systems. Whether they are forced into labor, the sex trade, or domestic servitude, they are held captive by their exploiters. Trafficking turns human beings into commodities, a profitable business built on the destruction of lives. It is a dangerous misconception to think that slavery only happens in poor, developing nations. The truth is, modern slavery is a global crime that exists in every single country, including the wealthiest and most developed ones. It is found in rural farm fields, suburban homes, bustling city restaurants, and illicit factories hidden in plain sight. In the United States, people are trafficked for labor in agriculture, hospitality, and domestic work. In Europe, vulnerable migrants may be forced into construction or the sex trade. No country is immune because exploitation thrives wherever there is vulnerability and a demand for cheap labor or services. The abusers in these situations use calculated tactics to maintain total control over their victims. A common method is confiscating passports and identification papers, which effectively renders a person invisible and powerless, especially if they are in a foreign country. Without documents, they cannot prove who they are, seek legal help, or even travel home. Another tactic is to withhold pay or pay so little that the worker becomes entirely dependent on the exploiter for food and shelter. This creates a powerful state of dependency, making it nearly impossible for the victim to leave. The psychological chains are often as strong as physical ones. Threats and intimidation are also central to the business of slavery. Exploiters will often threaten to harm the victim's family back home, using love and fear as weapons of control. They might threaten to report an undocumented worker to immigration authorities, knowing that the fear of deportation will ensure silence and compliance. Victims are often isolated, forbidden from contacting friends or family, and monitored constantly. This isolation erodes their spirit and makes them believe that there is truly no escape. The abuse is not just physical, it is a systematic dismantling of a person's will to resist. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations in 1948 to establish a common standard of rights for all people everywhere. Its clear prohibition of slavery in Article 4 was a promise to the world that this practice would be eradicated in all its forms. This document serves as a global moral compass, reminding us that the right to freedom is universal and non-negotiable. Yet, the persistence of modern slavery shows that this promise remains unfulfilled for millions. The gap between our stated ideals and the grim reality on the ground is a challenge to us all. Ending slavery requires vigilance and action from everyone, not just governments and large organizations. As individuals, we can learn to recognize the signs of human trafficking and forced labor. These signs might include a person who seems fearful, submissive, or anxious, especially in the presence of their employer. They may show signs of physical abuse, live in poor conditions, or work excessively long hours without a day off. If you suspect someone is in danger, do not intervene directly, as this could put the victim at greater risk. Instead, contact a national human trafficking hotline or local law enforcement safely and report your concerns. Your observation could be the key to someone's freedom. Lawyers and legal advocates play a critical role in this fight. They are on the front lines working to bring traffickers to justice and secure remedies for survivors. They can provide essential legal services, helping victims obtain immigration relief, such as a T visa in the United States, which allows survivors of trafficking to remain in the country and assist in investigations. They also file civil lawsuits against perpetrators and the businesses that profit from forced labor, seeking compensation for unpaid wages and damages. By using the law as a tool, these advocates help dismantle the economic incentives that allow slavery to flourish and ensure that survivors receive the justice they deserve. Our power also lies in our choices as consumers. The demand for cheap goods and services fuels the race to the bottom, where unethical companies cut costs by exploiting workers. We can make a difference by researching the brands we buy from and supporting companies that are transparent about their supply chains and committed to ethical labor practices. By asking who made my clothes or where did my food come from, we can create market pressure that forces businesses to take responsibility for the conditions under which their products are made. This conscious consumerism is a powerful vote for human dignity. Ultimately, the fight to end slavery is a fight for the soul of our shared humanity. It is a call to action to protect the dignity and freedom of every person. We must stand united as individuals, communities, and nations to create a world where no one is bought, sold, or controlled. This is not someone else's problem. It is our collective responsibility. Let us work together to strengthen laws, support survivors, and hold exploiters accountable. Let us build a future where the promise of Article 4 is a reality for all, and every person can live a life of freedom, safety, and self-determination.